Hello, this is Todd Luck, and I want to talk to you guys about why Tarzan Comics and Edgar Rice Burroughs comics are important. And I'm going to share my own story about how I got into Edgar Rice Burroughs stuff not once but 3 times thanks to comics. And we're going to give comics as an example, but what I'm about to talk about could apply to just about any type of licensing with these properties. It could be movies, it could be shows, comics, figures, whatever. Obviously, Tarzan has a very long history in comics, dating all the way back before comic books existed to comic strips. And then he had a very long history at various publishers, including Dale Goldkey, DC Comics in the 70s, Marvel Comics in the late 70s, Malibu Comics in the early 90s, Dark Horse Comics in the later part of the 90s. In 2010, Edgar Rice Burroughs' second most famous creation, John Carter of Mars, started getting comics put out by Dynamite Comics, and they started out unlicensed. They're now fully licensed. And for the last 6 years, American Mythology has been putting out comics of some of Edgar Rice Burroughs' lesser-known works. And right now, Dynamite is putting out a new Tarzan series, officially licensed, called Lord of the Jungle, and the 3rd issue of that should be hitting this month. And so that is an incredible legacy of comic book publishing with a single character. And the crazy thing is, most of it's really good, at least the stuff that I've been able to get a hold of from the last 50 some years has been amazing. And so that, to me, is the first justification for why we need Tarzan comics, because they're good. I mean, I think a good comic is its own justification for existence. They also make money for everyone involved, and that's very important if you want a franchise to actually keep going. And it also shows how viable the franchise is. I think decades ago it was just expected that any big character would have an ongoing comic series. Nowadays, when it's more difficult to get comics to last, characters tend to, kind of come and go in comic books. But I think, if you have a successful comic series, it is definitely a good argument that your character is still relevant and viable. And nowadays, they act as development for movies and TV shows sometime. Like for instance, if someone decided that they wanted to do a Tarzan movie that involved Tarzan's origin, then you could just hand them what Dan Jurgens is currently doing on Lord of the Jungle as an example of how it could be done well. But the most important reason, at least to me personally, is that this is how a lot of people discover Tarzan. This is how people who are not familiar with the character discover who the character is, and how people who are familiar but maybe have lapsed in their interest can be reactivated and start reading and being a fan of Tarzan again. And I know I've seen some people be like, oh, well, you should have just read the novels. Well, I wasn't born with an Edgar Rice Burroughs novel in my hand. I did not come out of the womb reading Tarzan of the Apes. And I know there was probably a past era where children did read Tarzan novels at a certain age. But those novels at this point are 100 years old, and we have a lot of other options. And I didn't grow up in an era where everyone read those novels just naturally. And I guarantee you people who are younger than me also didn't grow up that way. And so when I was the target demographic for Tarzan, when I was a kid, I never heard of the character outside of just a vague impression of like old movies and shows. He was this dumb guy who could barely speak English, who fought poachers in the jungle or something like that. And so the first time I was really exposed to Tarzan was when I picked up Tarzan vs. Predator at the Earth's Core by Dark Horse Comics. This was one of the ways that they kind of launched Tarzan and got people's attention early on when they got that license. And to give you some context, this was back in the 90s when these types of cross-company crossovers weren't a dime a dozen. People like me, in our memory was Batman versus Predator and how cool that story was. And so when you had a Predator crossover, it was still a big deal back then. And so I was really interested to see what that story would be like with Tarzan. And so I really enjoyed the miniseries. And I was talking to my comic shop owner, and I was thinking like, they just made up the stuff about the Earth's core and the dinosaurs and all of this stuff. And he was like, no, that's how Tarzan novels were, and I was like, wasn't Tarzan just a dude who fought poachers in the jungle or something? And it's like, no, he discovered lost cities and like a lost colony from Rome and all of this stuff. And I'm like, really? Yeah. And he was like, yeah, and he let me borrow his copy of Tarzan of the Apes. And I got to read that. And I was a young teenager, and it did interest me. It hooked me absolutely, surprised me in a lot of ways. And so I was able to check out Return of Tarzan from my local library because once you get to the end of Tarzan of the Apes, you have to read the next novel because there's kind of a cliffhanger ending with Jane, right? And the great thing was there was a big Tarzan push at the time, so I was able to pick up these new printings of the Burroughs novels. There's 2 novels per of these little books. The print is kind of small, but when you're young and your eyesight can handle this, it's fantastic, compact. I read a good many Tarzan novels this way. And there were just so many different things to keep me going on Tarzan. Dark Horse printed a fragment by Edgar Rice Burroughs that was completed by Joe R. Lansdale called Tarzan: The Lost Adventure. Dark Horse put out an ongoing Tarzan series and several mini-series. There were the amazing painted Joe Jusko cards of Tarzan and other Edgar Rice Burroughs characters. There was a Tarzan TV series, Tarzan: The Epic Adventures, starring Joe Lara, which actually tried to follow the novels and actually adapted several of them during the series. And even though I'd gotten out of action figure collecting at the time, I still couldn't resist going to the store and getting a brand new Tarzan figure to display in my bedroom. But eventually, of course, all that would stop. By the year 2000, no more Tarzan comics were being published. And so I kind of fell out of it. It wasn't any fault of the novels. They were great. I just got busy and just was never able to kind of keep reading them. And so I just kind of lapsed, and, Tarzan just went to the back burner of my imagination. And so that was the first time that comics got me into Edgar Rice Burroughs. The second time was when I heard about this series that Dynamite was going to be putting out called Warlord of Mars. And so I heard of John Carter of Mars. I was vaguely aware of it. I knew that there were an old novel where people ran around on Mars in harnesses that looked like they were out of He-Man, and they had gotten sword fights and flew around on airships, and that there were formed green Martians. But I just didn't know anything else about the character. I just had no context. But I figured that if I liked Tarzan, and he's by Edgar Rice Burroughs, maybe the same author did a good job with John Carter. And so I read the first 3 John Carter novels because those are all continued into each other. And I read the comics, which got really good. And I loved the John Carter movie when it came out. It was fantastic. But once I got past some of these early comics that I'm showing you guys, I started feeling like I got diminishing returns, and so I kind of got out of it. And they're still published to this day, and some of the stuff is still good. I do go back and read it, but I really did enjoy the initial stuff that adapted Burroughs and some of their early original stories more than some of the stuff that's come out in recent years. And so I just kind of got out of John Carter, and Edgar Rice Burroughs once again went to the back of my imagination. And so that brings us to the third and final time that comics have got me hooked on Edgar Rice Burroughs. And that's the recent American mythology comics that have come out in the last, I think it's about 6 years now. And so some of these were things I'd never even heard of, like The Land That Time Forgot. Some of them were concepts I was familiar with from the Dark Horse comics, like Moon Maid and Carson of Venus. But these comics, they started out solid and they got amazing. And so they definitely got me interested in Burroughs and showed me that beyond Tarzan and John Carter, beyond his most famous works, he had a lot of really, really great stuff in his novels. And so that led me to finally complete Tarzan and the Ant-Man after all these years and continue on with the Tarzan novels. And right now I'm on the 11th novel, Tarzan, Lord of the Jungle. And I gotta tell you guys, it doesn't matter if it's the 10th and 11th Tarzan novel, these are still amazing. And I'm also back to working my way through the Mars novels. And so I got through Mastermind of Mars, which is amazing. And probably after I finish Lord of the Jungle, I'll get to Fighting Man of Mars. And my story is a little bit unique because I do this YouTube channel. Edgar Rice Burroughs Inc. actually sent me the new novels that they're doing. And so I've been reading these as well, and they've been absolutely excellent. And while it does appear that American Mythology is wrapping up their run on the Edgar Rice Burroughs comics, we are extremely fortunate to have all those extraordinarily talented people working on comics and graphic novels for Edgar Rice Burroughs Inc., which are available on their online shop. And we're also extraordinarily fortunate to have an ongoing Tarzan series, Lord of the Jungle, coming out right now. And I know that the licensing is not the same version of the character as in the novel. That's how licensing works. They create new versions of the characters. Every single time I've talked about a faithful adaptation on this channel, they still make changes, right? I don't care if it's Russ Manning or the silent movies, there's still changes in those adaptations from the novels, and that's fine. And with Tarzan, we've gotten versions of him that are completely different from the novels, right? The MGM movies have absolutely nothing to do with the novel Tarzan. He's literally the antithesis of everything Edgar Rice Burroughs wrote in his novels. But you know what? Kids still enjoyed both of these, right? They would watch the movies and they would read the novels and comic books. The important thing is to have the licensed media out there for people to discover the character and then have the version from the novels available for people to get, whether that's the novels themselves, comics, whatever it is. And I think that's where we're going with Tarzan and the Burroughs franchises. There seems to be a very concerted effort to get them back into the mainstream and to get them out there so people can discover them again. All right, that's all my thoughts and all my ramblings. Like and subscribe for more videos. And until next time, see ya.